What is up? Welcome to the Get Hoptimized podcast. My name is Chris. I am your host, and today we are diving into the world of malt operations and handling systems. We're going to talk about designing and installing those systems, how to increase the efficiency of your malt operations, and more. Our resident expert today, Marc Marashi, who is a project manager with Malt Handling. They design custom grain handling solutions for craft brewers and distillers. I am stoked to dive into this topic. Mark, what is up, dude? Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. It's great to be here.
Yeah, man. Coming all the way up. Well, we're connected via Zoom, so it's not like you came here, but you guys are up in Chicago, right?
We are, yeah.
Sweet, sweet, sweet. I've been to Chicago several times. I used to live in Wisconsin, so
Oh,
we'd go
nice.
down there to party and stuff like that, from time or travel, fly out of O'Hare or whatever.
It's a great city. Don't let its reputation ruin it. It's actually a blast. It's beautiful. And just this area of Wisconsin too. And I'm from Michigan originally and stuff. I love the Great Lakes and the Midwest and stuff. So,
Midwest is dope. I think
yep.
the Midwest has some of like, if not the best beer in the whole country,
Oh,
honestly.
great beer all around for sure. And just, beautiful summers, not the best winters, but beautiful summers. And
Yes,
then the rest of the
winters
year.
are tough. Winters are tough, but you get used to it. Chicago also is amazing for Christmas time as well. It's nice.
It is, yeah, for sure. Like coming to town and doing the like whole downtown like Mag Mile thing with the lights and the Christmas trees and when I was a kid we used to come and they still had like FAO Schwartz and all that stuff. It was
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Well, we're here to talk about malts, not Chicago,
Or,
I'm sure. But
or
let's maybe
Christmas.
get a little background on you and your journey into this industry and how you got here.
Sure, yeah. So kind of just a funny like we I worked with the guy who is now my boss. He was a friend of mine years and years ago, and he had a neighbor who built brew houses, and he kind of just this was like kind of in the height of the craft brewery explosion. He just kind of started working with him, and at the time, he and I were working at a restaurant together, and then he found this sort of weird niche where they would include all the malt handling stuff in their sort of brew house packages, but it was always this kind of like almost like pre-packaged like here's a mill and an auger, and it was always kind of the same setup. But the problem is most breweries don't just have like copy and paste setups for that stuff or really for anything really. So he had this idea of just kind of trying to get into that niche. He started a very creatively named company, Malt Handling. But I think what worked great is it was like the first thing that showed up when you actually Googled that. And then I was his first employee. And I honestly, this was like 14 years ago almost. I knew about beer, but I didn't know much about the actual equipment. And it's been, we kind of just, he was good. He's an Iowa farm boy. So a lot of the stuff that we're using is like agricultural stuff that's kind of repurposed for commercial brewery applications. So he had a good background on that, but it was a little bit diving into the deep end for me. So, but
That's
we've
so
been
fun.
around for coming up on almost 14 years now, and um, managed to be, I don't want to say like the industry leader of it, but one of the sort of like industry mainstays for the sort of like niche that we're in. So
Well, you're doing anything for 14 years, you start to figure it out at some point. And
yeah. I mean, hopefully not 14 years in, hopefully like maybe a few weeks in, but yeah, it's you know, it was weird. I mean, my background, I went to film school and then I worked in restaurants for like 10 years. So it was like augers and mills and stuff were like totally Greek to me at the time. But
mhm. I mean, that's actually, something I wanted to talk about is like you get the nitty gritty in any industry, and you mentioned augers and mills and these things, and it's like, well, how exciting is some of these things, but there has to be something that keeps you going, right? You can keep doing this, and you're obviously pumped about it. What gets you excited about malt efficiencies and, and all that kind of stuff?
I mean, I think malt efficiencies is probably only exciting to a very small subset of people, and it's probably the people who are purchasing the raw products who are very excited that they get to spend less on it. But I think what's cool, honestly, more is just the industry at large. So particularly at the time when we got in, it felt like the brewers and distillers and stuff where it was like kind of like rock star culture or whatever. It was like really the kind of like mid 2000s, the height of just that explosion. And like just here in Chicago at the time, we went from having, Goose Island had been around for forever, but um, Revolution opened and Half Acre, which I would imagine are probably nationally known at this point. But it was really like a city, a huge city with like one, then two, then three craft breweries, and then all of a sudden now I don't even know how many are here now. Probably 150 or something crazy like that, you know. But so I mean, I think what was fun was like this was a little area that we got to specialize in that I think a lot of other people, particularly at the time, had not really specialized in, and we got to kind of just be part of that scene. And you know, it's as far as like
It is
we
a
work
great industry, man.
it's a
People
great
are
industry. And a
cool.
lot of the people, like a lot of our suppliers are like, they go on a sales trip and they're like, I went to a cattle farm and looked at, you know, I mean, we go to the Iowa pork show sometimes, or there's probably a less colloquial term for that, but half the products that they use are for like grinding and processing like carcasses or animal feces. And it's just like, yeah, that's just not as fun, you know?
Yeah,
There's a lot of those things you're doing, I guess, is what I'm saying.
when you work in the beer and spirits world, you get to partake in beer and spirits, which is
Yeah,
fun. So that's rad. That's rad. So let's start getting into some of the nitty gritty things here. And
sure.
where I'd like to start is maybe everyone's top question. Maybe I'm wrong about this. You know better than I do, but I think efficiency. It's like, all right, how do we make more money, less costs with,
Right.
and malt comes to mind with that. Let's maybe break down some of those things. I mean, what comes to mind when we say, all right, I want to, increase my malt operational efficiency? What does that mean? And what are the factors with that?
Probably the main factor in that is going to be the milling aspect. I mean, there's obviously this is like from the spectrum of equipment that we cover. You know, there's aspects in the kind of like liquid management and the brew house and stuff like that that would also affect that. But under our purview, the mill probably and the kind of grind you're getting is where you're going to see the biggest impact on that. And you know, it's so tough. There's like because there's so many factors that can affect that, like most of our stories are or our measurements of that are kind of anecdotal. But I mean, we've had people using like beater old mills that spend 25 grand and get a double pair, which means that there's two sets of rolls, four rolls total. And they're like, man, we had to rewrite all of our recipes and it's like 10% less grain, you know. So obviously what that translates to and what is exciting about that from the brew house or from the brewing perspective is that that's your raw product right there. So if you're getting a truckload of grain at a time, which is 48,000 pounds, that's all of a sudden 4,800 pounds extra you have with each truckload, so that starts to
Oh,
add up pretty
wow.
quickly. So
How is it extra? So, if let's say you didn't have your own milling operation, you're buying like pre-milled grain, right? And by poundage, you're saying that if you buy the, whole kernel stuff, you actually get more based on that poundage if you're milling yourself. Am I understanding that
well,
correctly?
you just need less grain because
Ah,
as your efficiency has gone up, it actually will screw your recipes up. You're going to end up with a much stronger product because you are getting the same amount of yield from like 90% of the product, basically.
got it. Okay. So does that happen sometimes where you
Yeah, no,
you have to
and again,
advise
it's
these
like
folks
it's
about the
so hard to
recipe?
measure because there's other things that could affect that as well. But we have, in some situations, we've definitely had people just who are probably using some old, janky tabletop setup who went from that to a brand new four-roll mill, and it's, they have to rewrite the recipes when it gets to that,
Oh shit. We got
Yeah,
a lot more sugar in this stuff now. Yeah.
yep, yep,
Boils down to. Right on. So, and like you mentioned, that it affects shipping, which is another form of cost efficiency. So you're getting, maybe your shipping prices are about the same, but like you said, you're getting more bang for your buck essentially with the
yeah.
whole stuff.
Less raw material, and I mean to the shipping point, that might add up to one less semi shipment of grain every year, which
Mhm.
was significant, so and then there's other factors too, there's like people oftentimes would just use flex augers for everything. That tends to, particularly after the mill, beat up the grain quite a bit more. It kind of makes it tough to control what that grind is. We have chain and disc and some other opportunities or other options for doing that a little bit more gently than some of the rougher conveyances and stuff. So there's a lot of things that can affect it, but the mill is probably the main one.
Got it. Milling is the big one. Are there any other like big like hidden costs that come to mind with a, pre-milled versus whole kernel.
Well, yes, I mean, so there is the stuff we just talked about, like efficiencies. There can be, productions that when it comes from. I mean, we we have a lot of mills in malt houses too, so I don't want to like speak ill of the quality, but it's just it's they're doing like mass production of it. You know what I mean? So I think there's a little bit less of like if you're trying to have control over what that grind looks like, you don't really have it when you're doing the pre-milled. That can lead to, in some cases, like stuck mashes or whatever, depending on the rest of your process. But beyond that, there's also the cost of the milling of the grain. So, like every time you get a batch of grain, if you're getting it pre-milled, they're charging more for the pre-milled grain than they would be for the whole kernel. So,
Got it.
uh, there's a few different layers to that onion, I guess.
And
So,
this stuff requires more space, right? If you're going to set up this system,
yeah,
or is it really not that much?
it depends on what you want to do. I mean, we do systems all the way where people will do 3 silos on load cells with giant elaborate conveyance systems and stuff. But I mean, I think people would expect for a large storage setups like that are going to have like a big footprint. But the mill itself really is only it maybe requires like a 4x4 you know piece of space on the floor on your floor plan or whatever. And we have people, it's not ideal, but people cram those in closets sometimes or whatever. I mean, it can be it can be minimal if it needs to be.
Well, I mean, maybe that's a good transition to talk about some of this like system design and
Sure.
installation. So, because if you're considering this, and you're like, well, I'm trying to upgrade from my, baby system here, and I want to start, milling my own grain or whatever it is in here. Let's talk about that. What goes into, designing a system or installing a system that folks should know about before they start making decisions.
Despite what I just said, it's a lot easier if we're in on the ground floor for setup. We would prefer not to put the stuff in a closet. But yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on the scope of the system. So if you're just doing like a little, like, hey, we have a little mill room right next to our brew house, we just want to put a teeny little mill in there and have an auger go through. We can certainly do that. That's kind of minimal as far as planning goes. It's still good to make sure that your inclines and your auger are less than 45 degrees, whatever. There's a lot of things that can kind of go into that as well. But on more complex systems, it kind of becomes about there's a control aspect, there's an automation aspect, there's like batching. Do you want to have how user friendly do you want it to be? Do you want it? Is it your head brewer that's going to be operating the equipment all the time, or are you going to have kind of a rotating roster of college kids that are coming in that you want to be able to just be like hit IPA button and it auto batches that for you. So
Hmm.
there's kind of that aspect that's usually kind of the starting point is like how much grain are we using, uh which kind of judges or decides like how many like bulk sources we have, or if bulk sources even make sense, and then how do you want that interface to work, like how user friendly does that need to be. And then obviously also a budget is
Yeah.
never not an aspect of that. And then kind of from there it goes down to like there's a lot of ways. The mill to the brew house is always going to be pretty similar. You might oftentimes have a grist case in there, or batch hopper of some sort if it's a distillery. But aside from that, that's all kind of there's not a whole lot of complexity that can happen between the mill and the brew house. Most of that stuff's gonna come from the storage side of it. So that meaning it could be either like, we have outdoor silos we can have multiple ones on same conveyance lines. You can get down to, if they're all on the same conveyance lines, they're feeding in with pneumatic knife gates and on load cells, or you can do like bulk bag stands inside, or a lot of the distilleries are really keen on these. This is like getting really in the weeds, but these like plastic tote things that they use for kind of bulk storage,
Hmm.
stands for as well.
You've
Um,
done some of the big like outdoor silos too. Is that
oh
something?
yeah, that's like like a large scope of what we do. Yeah.
Oh, snap, dude. What's the biggest one you've done? So those things are so cool when I see them.
Um, oh God, I mean, I don't think we've done much larger than like, so a truckload is 48,000 pounds. You always size a little overflow, so that's like 60,000 pound capacity. I don't I might be wrong in this. I think the largest we've probably ever done is 120,000 pound capacity, which is like basically to hold two semi trucks full of grain. And then
Whoa.
You end up with, unless you're getting to the like, there's different kinds of silos. We usually do the pre-welded ones just because it ships on a truck. The truck set them up right. They get rigged into place and it's done. The other ones that have like wider diameter are too big to be able to ship whole on the road. And so they come in like corrugated panels and then have to be like assembled on site. Um, so probably we they tend to be the biggest ones we've done tend to be probably like maxed out at 13-foot diameter, which I think is as wide as you can get on the standard truck, and then like maybe 50, 60 feet tall, something like that.
That's
So
so cool, man. Seeing that go up, you're like, dang, this thing is huge. Every time I see one, I'm like, man,
yeah.
cool. I thought, what younger me was like, oh, it's just for show, but like, no, these things are legit. They hold grain and they like
Some of them
conveyor
are just
belt
for
it up
show.
there, right? When they refill, they're like conveyor belting it up to
Yeah,
this.
it depends. The most of the ones we do, just because it's like cost effective on the at least our customer side, is they would have like a pneumatic fill line, and the trucks come. They have like what they're called like blower trucks, and they have like a hose that basically hooks up to the silo, and the truck itself just blows the grain up into the silo.
Dude, this stuff
Um,
is so neat.
yeah, yeah, it's wild. And then there are also mechanical ones, where they'll have like kind of basically drop pits for the trucks that then convey it up a bucket elevator and then have like a kind of a dispatcher system at the top that picks which silo it goes into and stuff.
Well, if the world ever goes to shit, and you're hungry, look for these silos. You get some
Yes,
nutrients out
yeah. If
of
you
there.
like barley and or
Yeah.
wheat or
Well,
rye,
if you're hungry enough, barley's good.
right, right.
Make something out of a cereal
You know
or
how to
something.
bake bread.
There you go. And you guys do stuff for breweries, so beer,
Mhm.
distilleries, and malt houses that are, basically putting farming and putting together this malt. Are there any like key differences in the equipment or operation between these two that are notable or interesting?
Yeah, there are. I mean, functionally, they're very similar. It's like this a lot of the same equipment kind of overlapping, but like a distillery, some distilleries operate basically the same as breweries, where they essentially like have like a watering process and whatever. But a lot of distilleries just kind of want powder. So we will, in those cases, do like hammer mills, and it's more specific to like kind of flour handling than it would be for like a brewer's grist. And then a malt house is kind of a different story altogether because you're not probably not well, we do actually mill at a lot of the larger malt houses, but that's not really part of the malting process. That's more for like them to provide to their customers. Yeah, the malt house side of it gets a little complicated because you're dealing oftentimes with like very either wet or damp um, germinated grain that you can't just be like piling into a flex auger that's going to turn it into like, split
Mm.
pea soup or whatever. You have to, there's a really like strong kind of emphasis put on the gentle handling. Like it's a lot of like belt conveyors and things that are going to like specifically not destroy it before it gets toasted or whatever. So,
Yeah, it's
uh,
interesting. Like once you have moisture into the mix,
oh yeah.
you've got to handle it a lot differently, as opposed to if you've already got the dry product, then it's, as long as you don't get it wet, and you're good.
Yeah, and there's like the the malt house's finished product is the grain. The brewery's finished product is the beer. So that can get a little bit more beat up in the brewery, and it's not like the customer is like, why does this malt look like shit? But from a
Yeah.
malt house, if you're the brewery and you get it and it's all beat up, that's a very different thing because that's the product they're providing you. So it's really for functional purposes, but also for like, kind of just aesthetic purposes. Nobody's trying to ship gnarly beat up product.
Yeah.
So
That's cool that you get to see the whole operation though, from malt
yeah.
house to, basically, from it's really B2B operation, but from supplier to supplier or manufacturer, maybe is that the or producer is the better title for these folks. But you see the whole
Yeah.
thing and it probably gives you tons of insight into how this stuff works, full system, really.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, some of the malt houses we work with are actually like growing this stuff like on site and then they're shipping it to different areas. So there is this like almost kind of from crop to finished product aspect of it.
You been
Uh,
on any farms? Checking out farms and stuff.
I mean, in my life, sure. Most of the malt houses I've been to in person have not had on-site farms. We've sold to some that do, but I've never actually been there. But
I always think that's cool. Maybe it's because I'm like such a digital dude. I spend all of my day in front of my computer and
Yeah.
doing marketing stuff. It's like, man, some days I just want to get outside and do some farm stuff. That'd be fun because we talked to some malt folks. I have a hop supplier that's a client, and
Yeah.
they have farms, and it's like I'm so jealous. It sounds so cool. Until I'm
Oh,
out there with my hands bleeding and shit. I'm like, well, maybe not.
yeah, when you're sweating at 2 in the afternoon, they probably feel a little differently. But I agree, and that is like one of the cooler things about, again, kind of going back to that, like what's the appeal of this? Like just going to those places. I mean, driving up to Michigan or something and meeting with customers and sitting outside on their plot of land and a sunny day looking at the setup or whatever. Yeah, it's nice, man. It's cool to get out and be able to kind of go to those spots and all that stuff. So
Super rad, super rad. So I want to have you put on your advice cap.
sure.
Things I think of that maybe some of our listeners are again considering these options or are close to or have maybe gone through it. Maybe they're like, well, what I wish I would have known. So advice from you on like updating current systems versus installing a new system. If you're looking at your system and saying, all right, should we upgrade? Should we just build the whole thing new? What advice would you give that person in their decision making process?
I mean, again, budget always comes into that, but I really probably the biggest factor for this, we were talking about kind of raw materials earlier and stuff. I think it's like the return on investment. There's a lot of I certainly don't want to discourage anyone from ever buying anything from us, but we get a lot of small guys coming our way that like, I think it's exciting. You got your brewery and you're looking at all the different equipment that you could be populating it with and doing your research and stuff. But there is some times where it's like, oh, I don't know, man. If you're doing a 7.5 barrel brewery, you might not want to spend like 25 grand on a 4 roll mill because that sort of like efficiency benefit on the raw materials there is great, but on that scale, you might be looking at like 10 years for that to actually pay back that mill.
Hmm.
So I think it's kind of just like we can help with that, but it's going to come down to a little bit of like number crunching on your end, like looking at what you pay for your product, and we can kind of guide you with how we think we can help like lower your grain usage, maybe lower your labor hours or whatever, for using going through a typical brew in a day or whatever. But really what it's going to boil down to is like what's the cost difference from your manufacturer to get stuff that comes in probably three different main ways. There's the change in efficiency from being able to handle your own grind. There's the not paying for the pre-milled grain. And then there's also the main thing, maybe even more than some of those other things, is what it costs to deliver per pound. So if you're getting 50-pound bags, your grain per pound costs a lot more than if you're getting a semi-load. If you're
Hmm.
buying 48,000 pounds at a time, usually you're going to be on some sort of contract with your maltster. Um, you will pay less per pound if you have the mill. You will use less grain, and if you're not paying them to pre-mill it, that's a cost you're saving there too. So that's where I would kind of start to, and those may not make sense for everybody, but that's where it like makes sense to look at what your usage is, talk to your malt supplier, and see what those price differences are, for difference in quantities, for paying to have them mill it, and then again, they probably really can't. I can't. I don't think anybody can tell you specifically what that change in efficiency is going to be, but you can expect at least probably in the realm of, depending on what your starting point is, like 2 to 10% change in efficiency from the milling process. So,
I'm kind of
um,
imagining it as like, solar. And solar
yeah,
is big here on the West Coast. I'm sure it's bigger everywhere else too. But, that's a big thing they talk about. It's like, all right, what's your energy usage? How much is it going to really cost you to put these panels up? And then how long is it going to take before you start realizing a benefit from that? If you don't have the surface area space on your house or your farm or whatever to make it worth it, then it just doesn't make sense. And that's kind of what you're saying is you got to crunch the numbers, look at your, benefits of the efficiency and how long that's going to take to get back into a positive ratio in your pocket. And if that all looks good, great. If not, then you got to find a different way to approach it, right?
yeah, and that's actually a great analogy. It's like putting in infrastructure that will save you money in the long run. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like hopefully in 6 months or a year or something like that. But then you will start to see accumulated savings there. And then there is sometimes too. Just I mean, look, sometimes people want to buy a sports car. You know what I mean? Sometimes people are just
I
like
just
attached.
want it. It's cool.
Right, exactly. And I mean, we have we're the stateside reps for Bueller, which is kind of like almost the like Ferrari of mills. They're like wonderful machines, and definitely seen some guys who like get a cheap brew house, they get a cheap thing, and for whatever reason, that was the piece of equipment, this mill, that they focused on, and they'll spend a hefty sum of money just to have that cool thing, So there's nothing wrong with that too if you got it.
You saw it at
So
CBC, you're like, it's so cool. I must have.
exactly. Yep.
I geek out on some of that stuff too. I'm like, that is just badass. I want to have that operating.
Yep.
So right on. Okay, so more advice from you is maybe about spent grain,
Right.
because that's another factor here. Is that once you've used it, and I don't know how far you guys go into this route, so I kind of figure maybe you know something about this. Do you have any advice on how to deal with spent grain, or the equipment that you might need, or things you should consider?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's we do all that stuff. We don't do the actual I should rephrase this. We get a lot of calls about like asking us to pick up grain. We don't actually haul the grain away, but we put in spent grain removal systems. So
Hmm.
um, that'll vary too, depending. I mean, I think your audience is probably primarily more brewery than it is distillery, but that'll vary between those two industries a little bit. Primarily, what it is we will use either progressive cavity pump or a pneumatic conveyor to remove the grain from the brew house. Ideally, you kind of want it. I mean, you're whoever's taking it away. I think primarily this may have changed a little bit in the last few years. Primarily, it's for cattle feed. Cows have four stomachs, so they can actually digest spent grain, which is something that like most other farm animals can't do. So it primarily goes and gets used as cattle feed.
Hmm.
What they probably don't want is to be driving a like truck of sloshing slop away when they pick it up. So ideally, we try to keep that, you know, as dry as we can. Inevitably, like, I mean, it's like wet grain; it can't be that dry. And then that can be handled in a bunch of different ways. If you're, these systems can get kind of expensive. So if you don't have the money for it, a lot of guys will just get a trailer that they set out back, and the pump goes straight to a trailer, and then once a week their grain guy comes and either swaps a trailer or takes the trailer and brings it back, or
Hmm.
we've seen people put it in roll top dumpsters or whatever. But the sort of more fully fleshed out way to do it would be to actually have a silo specifically to hold your spent grain. Like if you have a beer garden on site, or outdoor patio or anything like that, or even just like people coming in and out the front door, you might not necessarily want a dumpster full of like starting to turn wet grain with like all the rodents
That
and
is
whatever.
nutrient rich stuff ready for
Yeah.
bacterial growth, man.
Oh yeah. It's get a nice sour, sweet smell going on. So that would probably be the best way to do it. And then that can be done a couple different ways. Either the silo can just sit on the ground. We could have another one of those pumps that just kind of arcs up and goes to fill a truck trailer, or probably the best way to do it is to have it on like an elevated structure, and then they just like will basically pull the truck underneath, and then they have a pneumatic gate, so they can just kind of like open a key box, hit a switch, and that gate opens up, and we'll just kind of gravity fill the
Because this stuff
truck.
is heavy as crap, I imagine. It's
Oh
super.
yeah, it's like weirdly, because it's so much denser, it's like volumetrically not that much heavier than raw grain, but it is like compacted.
Mm,
So um and it's like a little messier. So
yeah. Yeah. Well, continuing down the advice train, everyone's favorite topic, safety. And this is something that I was kind of surprised to read about on your side. I was like, oh, I didn't think there was safety concern. I wouldn't think there were that many, aside from, jamming your finger in a machine or something like that. But
oh yeah.
you guys actually talk about several things here. So advice on how to prepare or be safe with malt handling.
Well, the biggest thing, and I'm assuming this is probably what you're alluding to, is that like you're any any anarchists listening probably already know that a cloud of grain is essentially a bomb. You see that in rural areas a lot. You have just silo explosions and things of that nature. Really, all it takes is a spark, and that just goes up like tinder. So, ideally, no brewery or distillery should be So they shouldn't be creating a clouds of dust like that that could be combustible in any area, but because particularly distilleries are a little bit more so because there can also sometimes be explosive vapors on site and things like that. A lot of it too will just depend on not necessarily actual likely risk, but what your inspector deems to be the hazard classification for the area. So to that end, we offer great like dust removal systems and things like that. They can be anywhere from, some of them are kind of like basic little like almost like vacuum carts that have like something similar to almost like a series of like furnace filters in them,
Hmm.
and they have like kind of ambient collection hoods, or you can directly pipe them to things. We also have like fully like integrated ones that would have to be built into the building with like, I mean, they can get insane. They can have explosion panels and like explosion venting. Like if there's explosion, it literally pipes it up a certain way to go out the building and stuff. I mean, they can get quite elaborate, but I think for probably most of your listeners, something like a little like ambient dust collection cart is probably more in line with keeping the room clean. And I mean, I would hope nobody's walking into their grain room and it's a like wall to wall cloud of dust. That would be a problem. But
That's the time to light up the cigarette for sure. And
yeah, yeah, yeah. Don't do
that.
yeah.
No,
Uh,
don't do that. That'd be a bad move. No, I mean, this stuff is so fascinating to me because, I don't know tons about it. I've been working in the industry, obviously, but not on that side of it. And things like that, where it's like, oh man, yeah, there's all these dust particles everywhere. And if you're not safe about that, then you could run into issues with, the inspector being like, nope, and that could shut down operations.
oh yeah.
Um, Also, you could hurt people, which is not good. Nobody wants to do that. It's beer. We're supposed to
Oh,
be having
oh.
fun. And then, all the equipment to deal with it is just, constantly advancing. And, is there, pulling out the crystal ball for a second before I get to my last question for you is there anything that is coming down the pipe in the future? What's the future of malt handling look like?
Well, I don't know. Hopefully just continuing to kind of expand and do our thing. We have some new, I mentioned the partnership with Bueller, we're very excited about. They're a massive international company that
Oh yeah.
we said makes what we think is probably like the Ferrari of mills. So happy to be working with them. And I don't know. It's honestly it's an interesting time for the industry right now. There's been some like major kind of cultural shifts with the kids. um, and I think it feels a little uncertain, but we're kind of just waiting to see how this plays out. I think all that stuff's a little cyclic, and hopefully we'll see, some a younger generation that's not
Well, I was just reading. I think I forget where I saw the report. So, this is bad for me to quote this and put this out there, but I think it's interesting that like Q1 was like the biggest drinking like quarter ever for Gen Z. And they drank more
probably
than
good
they ever
reason for
have.
that. But
Yeah, it's like, okay, well, maybe there's a turn here. Maybe they're just waiting for the trauma, or there's probably the reporting on this stuff is weird because it's like,
yeah,
what age group? I mean, are they not even of age to drink yet? What's the deal here? And we're still figuring it out. So the kids will eventually, the data will show us, but we'll get there.
I think it's like I remember when you're a kid and all your parents are like, "There's nothing cooler than a microbrewery." You're like, "All right, whatever, narc. I'm gonna go, do my Molly or whatever the kids do." But I feel like those kids are now growing older and probably having kids themselves, and those kids are gonna, I mean, I feel like this stuff just shifts around. There was a big, I feel like, brewery boom in the '90s that kind of subsided, and then it came back like 10 years later in the 2000s and stuff. Like, I think we're probably on a little bit of that cycle right now. So,
Yep. It'll be around. Beer is going to be, it's like the oldest humans, man. So,
oh yeah.
beer and whiskey and all that. So, anyways, the last question I have for you is like, at what point do you start thinking about hiring a professional here? Whether you're, thinking about buying equipment or designing a system, when's the right time to contact somebody?
You know what? It's not even that much of a barrier like that. We're not H&R Block or anything. You can call us and we'll give you a quote and we'll talk to you. It's not like you don't have to like we're not on retainer or anything like that. So maybe we should be. But we basically offer more or less free consultation. We'll quote you, the equipment you're interested in. Nobody's going to try to it doesn't do me any favors if I sell you $50,000 worth of equipment that could scratch your back for, $5,000 or something like. So we just, yeah, we can take a look at kind of what you need and talk you through some options there. And you can decide yourself when you look at the quotes and kind of see what we present. And I don't think there's any barrier. I mean, we do things as simple, honestly, as like probably half our customers are just people like, hey, I want a flex auger. And it's like not anything nearly as elaborate as what we were talking through tonight. So yeah, there's no anything you
There's
need.
no
We're
wrong
happy.
time. If you got questions, reach out. And it's probably better to ask first. What's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to realize, oh, I don't need a professional yet, but at least I talked to somebody to find out, right?
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And you guys do equipment, you do installation too,
We do.
um,
Yep.
design. You help design
Fine. Yep.
floor plans and stuff.
Yep.
And we mentioned the safety stuff. You guys are in the beer and the distillery industry and the malt house industry. Is there anything else under the sun that you guys do that I missed there?
Yeah, we do. Less so than the rest of those, but we have equipment specifically for cannabis handling. We have equipment for well, a lot of the same malt equipment has applications for coffee processing, for pet food. Oddly enough, it's the same like material processing for pet
Oh, wow.
food. There's a lot of random things. The silos we have can also be used for sand. We've put some in railroad stations. It's a weird thing. They use sand to help the trains brake. They put it on the rails.
Oh,
Helps
wow.
with grit. Also, they use sand silos at golf courses and stuff. So we are malt handling, like with a focus on brewing and distilling and malting and stuff, but we have a lot of kind of auxiliary, applications as well. So,
And pet food to golf sand to trains.
right.
Man, you guys are all over the place. If someone wants to reach out to you guys to learn more about this stuff, is the website better? I guess what is the website? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yep. The website's malthandling.com. Also, our company number is, if you want to talk to somebody right away, probably easiest thing is just call us at 773-888-7718.
Nice. Well, we will put for those listening, and you want to come find the show on our website, on Shopify or not Shopify, Spotify or podcast, Apple Podcasts or whatever. We will add the links to the show notes so you can capture that. And if you're watching, you'll probably see it right below your video screen here, and uh, click those links. Go check out Malt Handling. They got all kinds of documentation on things you can get in touch with Mark to chat malt operation systems and all the things we talked about today. Mark, this was a pleasure, man. Thank you for informing me and educating me and our audience.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me. It was great to talk to you.
Of course, man. Have a good one.
You too.